Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. It's Wednesday. It's time for another episode of the Leadership Toolkit. And so often on this show, I've got the best guests. I really do. I have got absolutely amazing people from all walks of life, from in the US, outside of the US, all different facets and verticals of business. And I am so blessed to be able to have conversations with people. And we talk about successes and failures. And one of the things that I found that we really lean in on over time is like, hey, what works? What's good? And you all out there in social media land and YouTube, when you're listening to the podcast, when you're watching the podcast, you look and you see these awesome things that all of these leaders and managers and people have built. And so I'm bringing back on the show today a really good friend of mine. He's a great friend of the show, Ian MacLeod. He is manages and runs Grow Up Leadership. He's a leadership consultant. He's actually returned to school for his master's in leadership and management. He is known as the world's illest boss. It might be self-titled, but it's awesome. I've got that. You saw that certainly on the thumbnail. And so one of the things we're going to dive into today, because he is a good friend and we're able to speak very candidly on this stuff, is we're going to talk about some things that leadership sucks. I think that's maybe a way to put it, or things that suck for leaders or in leadership. And so that's the slant we're going to say. And if you know Ian, we're going to keep it all awesome and positive and so forth. And I'm going to bring him on the show. So Ian from Grow Up Leadership. Ian, thanks for joining me today, sir.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be here hanging out with you and talking leadership and talking all things not leadership or dumping
things that you shouldn't be doing in leadership.
Yes. And some of it, I think in theory, it's a good theory, but some of the things I'll share, but it's found to be not a good habit to pursue. So
absolutely. So let's get through the intros, because if somebody has been living under a rock and they don't know who Ian MacLeod is, the world's illest boss, is that self-titled? I saw your coffee mug.
I stole that from The Office. They the main leader there has the world best boss, and I took that and just put illest.
The illest.
Yeah.
So if you would just give a little bit of history. What's your background in business? What's your background in leadership and consulting and so forth?
Yeah.
I'd love
to. Real quick. So so I have over 15 years in management experience, up to kind of a senior manager role, supporting about 80 staff. And about 5 to 6 years in training new leaders. So that's onboarding new leaders with everything that's kind of foundational, learning about performance management, delivering feedback, that kind of stuff. And then currently I am, like you shared, I'm back in school, grad school. I have a business degree, business administration degree, and I'm currently back in grad school at University of Houston, their Bauer School of Business for a master's in management, ton of different certificates and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so then I also offer foundational training for entry level to mid-level managers, and some consulting on management as well. And I just like hanging out, creating content, talking about leadership in general. It's a fun topic for me.
It absolutely is. And for anybody that is either tuning in and watching, or if you're listening, real quick, I'm going to throw this on the screen. You can find Ian on YouTube at @grow up, spelled like group, GROUP 512. So he's on YouTube there. You can connect at GRO leaders, LEADERS up.com. And certainly one of the ones that I always get, and I love your shorts, man. I think they're so relevant. Is you can connect with him on TikTok. He does a lot. It's grow.up.leadership, and it's gro.up.leadership. So you can connect with Ian on all of those places. So let's dive right into it, because one of the things when we started talking, and I think you and I are both on the same page on this, we always lean into like, what's the positive? How do you grow? How do you do the good things? This is how you do a good thing, and this is how you do a good thing even better. And so one of the things we talked about just briefly when you're coming on the show is we said, well, let's talk about what are those pitfalls? What are things that leaders need to stop? And so let's just start there. Like, what are the top 1, 2, 3 things that you see that just absolutely have to change or have to stop right now, Ian?
I don't think this is shared enough or talked about it enough, but I want to put it out there, is the idea of having your employee go out on a limb and then and to typically, they're sharing or promoting or pushing some policy with a customer, and typically because the company, the organization, for whatever reason, every company that you kind of have to, in your business strategy, you have to figure out what yes, grow up. You have to figure out what your focus is, right? Either your cost leadership or you're differentiating in some other way, right? And so that means in any strategy, there's things you're going to do and there's things you're not going to do. And
Hmm.
oftentimes those policies and those procedures and those things that are kind of the guardrails that staff are having to communicate to customers, are those kind of, that's the things we're not going to do. The problem oftentimes I see is that we have employees go out on a limb and they're pushing some policy. They're kind of pushing back to with a customer, and that customer wants to level up, and eventually they get to somebody who then doesn't abide by the policy, right? And it just breaks trust. It's a terrible approach. So there's a story I want to share, and
Hmm.
we probably all heard of Southwest Airlines and their, they have kind of certain things that they did, especially more in like late 70s, 80s, 90s, that kind of thing, where they were really well known. And they were able to deliver on certain things really well. They had very cost effective. They were quick as far as their turnaround. They had great customer service, but there were some things that they didn't do to create this kind of equation and be able to be successful as a business. They had to do some things where they didn't have assigned seating, right? They didn't transfer bags at different layover stops. They didn't have a first class. There was things that they did. So there's this kind of famous story of Herb Kelleher, the CEO of the time, that kind of invented Southwest, and really made this successful.
Their whole culture.
Right. He
Okay.
receives this letter or email from a customer who has basically got to him, right? And usually in every other company, by the time they get to the CEO, that they're going to give in to whatever plus 100 other things that they'll give the customer, right? That's
Sure.
usually how it happens, right? But in this situation, this customer basically sends an email, and is sharing that she has these strong concerns, with not transferring bags between flights. So she shares her situation. She's a grandmother. She's often traveling to see her grandchildren. She struggles to transfer planes at the layover stop, and asks Southwest Airlines to start transferring bags like all other airlines do. And so he's got this point where he can basically say, no, we're sticking to our policy. This is what it is. So he writes this very empathetic email, demonstrates empathy, really kind of says, I understand your concerns. However, we're not changing our policy. This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. And he CCs the entire company. So they all see and know. So all those people who had went out on a limb probably and talked to this customer beforehand, they're all now validated. They're all, and you can imagine the amount of trust that builds when you go out on a limb, and then you're out there and you're kind of going back and forth between this customer for this organization. And if your manager comes out there with you and it supports you, that's awesome. And again, you feel great about your company. You feel great about what you're doing. So I'm not saying. I mean, I think there are situations where sometimes a frontline employee may not really understand things well. They may not be demonstrating empathy. They should be empathetic. They should, if there's opportunity to adjust, they should try to meet those customer needs. But if there's a hard and fast policy, this is the way we do things, you need to have that consistency all the way up. And I think that's probably big thing number one. Stop doing that. Stop putting people out there.
Well, no, and I agree with you, and I think one of the things too for anybody that's watching or listening to the show, where you have to be able to differentiate it is, and let me just be really clear with this. I was going to say really transparent, but we'll get into transparency here in a minute
Yes,
because that's a big leadership buzzword.
it is.
We're not saying, and Ian's not saying like, oh, hey, if you as an employee went out and you stuck to something or misunderstood it or made a mistake, right? It's not that that leader, that manager, that person where that policy is in place. You're talking very cut and dry, all the emotions removed. It's not somebody making a mistake you're having to come in and correct. It's just, this is how we do things. This is part of the company. This is part of the culture. This is part of, from the front line to the middle management to like what you're sharing, the CEO. This is our mode of operation. And so when that's the case, you have to, when you're coming in from a leadership, when you're coming in from a leadership place, to defend that policy and also therefore defend that employee, defend that person,
Right.
you
Right.
have to do so. You still have to be empathetic. You still have to be eloquent, right?
Yes.
But you can do all of those things without, you it's important not to sacrifice the process and the company's values,
Yeah. And
right?
and the reality is that, I mean, and I think we'll get in further into this, but you can't be all things to all people all the time. And companies that say and do that, they're not being honest, right? And so I think that was the beauty. That's why people really love working for Southwest Airlines, and people who flew on Southwest Airlines, they knew what it was. They knew what they were getting, and this is what they signed up for. And for that company to deliver on their promises, they have to do some things that other airlines are like, they can't do these things, right? It's
Right.
just, you have to say no, or you have to be bad at some things because you're going to be really good at some other things.
Well,
And
and it's perspective too, though.
yeah,
Like when you say, "Oh, you got to be bad at some things," that it's not necessarily bad. That's just not where their values and their process is at. That's okay. You
right.
know, we one of the things I was going to bring up, because so any what else? Because I said, what are the top couple or three things? What else is something that you see because I agree with you, like that first one of, hey, don't have your employees go out on a limb and implement this process and then not back them up. What's something else you see?
Oh, keep hitting them. Let's get. I mean,
Let's
if we're
go.
dumping, I'm going to keep dumping. Another
Okay.
one that I will say, and I think that so, and let me, before I jump to that, I will say there is a, if you want more information on what I was referring to, there's a great podcast called Fixable, and a, a, a episode called "Why You Should Get Good at Being Bad," and great podcast. Is through TED Business. It's two, I think they're organizational psychologists. So check them out if you're wanting to get more information on that. That's kind of where they go more in depth on that for sure.
No, I love it. I love that here's one of my favorite things. This is why I so much enjoy you as a guest, Ian, is because you always come, like, you have such a wealth of knowledge and wisdom that you bring to the table. I love your storytelling, and I love the fact you always come with receipts, because you're like, oh, hey, by the way, go check out this thing. Hey, by the way, you can check this out, because I think that's super powerful, man.
I mean, and this is the thing. I will say all the stuff I'm talking about is typically, they're not oftentimes not my ideas. There's somebody else who was smarter than me and probably spent years and years doing research to figure this thing out, right? So
Sure.
and I love that stuff. But the beauty is, I don't have to go. I can just read a book, or watch a podcast, or read an article and get the information, and then I can figure out how to apply that to the business world. And I think that's where the step is. A lot of this stuff actually, a lot of this great stuff comes from the world of psychology, right? It's all about how do people behave. So they use a lot of that behavioral sciences that transfer over to economics, and then obviously to the world of leadership and management. And so,
I'm gonna point that. I'm
go
going to
ahead.
point this out then too, because you guys, if anybody didn't hear, I pick out these little pieces. And one of the things that Ian said, and you, as any good leader, any good business person, any good entrepreneur, you constantly have to be growing and seeking knowledge,
Absolutely.
constantly. And that's something that I really, and again, also I admire about you, because every time you come, you say, hey, let me share this with you. And I agree with you. There's so much information out there. It's easy to get lost in it. So when you're deliberate about your own growth and you say, hey, I'm going to go pick out this thing, or I'm going to listen to the Fixable podcast, and you give these specifics, people be aware of that you constantly have to be growing and
Yeah.
pushing yourself to gain more knowledge. So
And
I was going to say, let's get
yeah,
into the second.
let's
What else do you hear?
So another one, this is another big one that is going to be even more controversial, and a lot
Okay.
of people probably won't agree with me on this one. But hear me out. Let me get through it. Self care at
Mhm.
not on a individual level, but at a business level is BS. And I'll tell you why. And I'll go, man, that's people are probably like, whoa. If anybody's watching this, somebody is going to be like, that's not right, Ian. And I believe in self care, but the problem I see oftentimes is that companies are basically they're they're using self-care, so they're promoting self-care. They've obviously acknowledged that there's some sort of reason why people need self-care, right? So they're acknowledging that something is going on that's causing burnout, that's causing great amounts of stress and anxiety. They're fine with that. They've acknowledged that. And instead of addressing the root problem, that's probably some systems problem, that's probably some staffing problem, it's probably some leadership problem, like their leaders and managers aren't doing a good job. Whatever it may be, something in that corporate culture is saying, we're fine with that problem. We're just going to put a band aid on it of doing self care. And let's do all these different kind of retreats and different things to help you feel better about yourself. Uh, I think, unfortunately, they're doing a disservice oftentimes by promoting simply self-care and making it sound like they really do care about employees. If they really cared, they would be addressing those root problems, whatever they are. So that's again,
So what you're saying is it's a cover up. So how do you let's talk about for a second, how do you solve that, right? Because one of the things you're saying, okay, well, hey, there's this root problem, bad leadership, bad process, something's gotten in the way.
yeah,
And we go, oh, well, what we're going to do, hey, yeah, this thing over here sucks, but hey, wait till you check out our retreat this weekend.
right.
You're going
Yeah,
to be able to gain so much knowledge and build relationships with your peers and coworkers. So how do you remove the fluff from that and get down to the root?
yeah. So I think first, I mean, you need to really spend some time, and there's different analysis you can do, right? Like SWOT analysis, those kind of things where you're in SWOT analysis against strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, whatever that is. Basically, just trying to uncover, okay, here's some symptoms, right? Whatever these symptoms are, and so poor morale, low, retention issues, performance issues. Those are all symptoms of something else that's causing that, right? Like no
Sure.
company sets out to have a bad morale and a bad culture. Oftentimes, unfortunately, what they end up doing is they don't design and work to create a great culture or a great environment that supports them. And so, and if you don't lead a culture will end up leading you, right? So
Mm,
either you get in front of that and you were the one building that. And so I will say probably number one thing I see is they invest some effort in building job descriptions. They have some, relatively basic hiring process. They might do some simple onboarding, but beyond that, you don't see any performance management system. So meaning like here's our organizational goals, here are the individual goals and how that trickles down or aligns to that, here's the behaviors or what we expect from you, and this is the routine feedback we're giving you, the coaching, all that kind of stuff. And they don't train leaders, right? You have a system where you have people are oftentimes promoted with no further training, right? They're great at whatever they're doing here. It's called the Peter principle, where
hmm
you're great at this role, and then you get promoted up to a level of incompetence. And I see that unfortunately too often. So that's but I will say there are things too, and I think a lot of people get really fixated and really focused on it, the leaders and the individuals. And there's opportunity where there's actually the big problems are actually it's a systems problem, right? So they just need to fix the actual internal systems. I know I'm always sharing all these stories, but there's a famous story from World War II where there's the pilots, these bombers and all of that kind of on
hmm
the American pilots, they kept crashing, right? And so the internally the people kind of, the leadership internally kept looking at it, and they kept blaming the pilots are the problems. These pilots keep crashing, they keep having these problems, that kind of thing. They actually hired a business kind of consultant group to come in and look, and what they found was all the planes, had different different ways they were configured. They were all different. They had the levers and the buttons and all the different stuff was all over the place. There was no consistency whatsoever. So when the pilot was in, they were used to flying one plane, and now they have to fly a different plane, and they got to figure it all out while they're also being shot at or having to drop a bomb or all that stuff. Once they figured out that they just need to create a consistent kind of cockpit, then all of a sudden those crashes dropped dramatically, right? So they improved their performance dramatically just by changing the system, not the individuals. So I will say too, there's oftentimes there's situations where you have a system that needs to be corrected, and fixing that will fix all this other stuff, and then you don't have the problems that need self-care and burnout and all those other things too. So again, address root problems.
No, it's crazy that you're sharing that, because like for us today, as we sit here in 2025, you look and go, well, of course, all the things inside a plane are the same. Of course, all the things in this car are the same, etc.
Yeah.
You have these different, it's just the basic standardization of product, right? And because they were probably back, I mean, because we're going back oddly, what, 75 years, a little more than that, between 75 and 100 years. That's crazy that we're there in history. But to say, like, because all of those things were manually assembled, there wasn't consistency. They said, well, we put all this stuff together.
There
was no mass production.
Right. There's just whoever designed it, that's how they designed it, and that's where they decided to put stuff, and there wasn't that consistency. And so that was the root problem. If they had just when they fixed that and they figured that out, things improved dramatically. But instead, again, oftentimes in that case, the leaders themselves were blaming the pilots and saying these pilots are just terrible. They need more training. And really, they just needed to create a better system for them to work.
System.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, it just depends. Like, you need to spend some time looking at it to figure out what that root problem. And a lot of it is just asking questions. I think this goes to another problem, I will say, with leaders, is that they oftentimes are overconfident and spend too much time thinking they know all the answers. And they don't spend enough time or enough effort asking the right questions.
That's a strong statement. I want to come back to that in just a sec. But one of the things Leadership with Mike brings up, he says that's a big one. Leaders aren't trained. We've talked about that before, you and I, where it's like you have somebody that is, they're good as an engineer, or they're good as a salesperson, or they're good as a professor in college. They're like, they rock at what it is that they do. But when you step back and look at it, it's because we have all these systems, these trainings in place for that role. So then they get promoted on up, and they say, well, we're going to make you a manager, or we're going to make you a leader. We're going to put you in this role. And the person goes in there, and all they're operating off of is an example of their past leader. They're not operating out of, hey, here's the playbook, here's the processes, here's the system in place. They're operating off of, well, this is what I saw, so this is what I'm going to do. And a lot of times it's a shitty leader example, right? There's somebody that's not good. One of the things you just brought up, and I love that Mike said that. He says, a big one, leaders aren't trained. That's one of the sole reasons that I started this podcast. I've been very fortunate in my career, and you've told me before, you've been fortunate throughout yours that you've had some really good managers and leaders that said, hey, we're going to do leadership development. We're going to do this. So for me, as I've watched it happen in other businesses or with other people, I've been fortunate that I had really good mentors. And so it's like, hey, I want to be able to share that. Let's have that conversation, and let's talk about what works. In this case today, we're talking about some of the things that don't. So don't do that. Don't go out on a limb. Don't be, don't. One of the things I'm hearing you say is like, don't assume it's always somebody else's fault, because like in the situation of the planes, one of the things you realize, it's not the pilot's fault. It's also probably not the general's fault, the people that are out there controlling it. It's a circumstance, and the circumstance has to be repaired, right? And it takes somebody else coming in from the outside, a third party, to go, hey, wait a minute, we got a problem here. And it's not because, the one thing that I do think is at fault that sucks is because the leadership's going, well, it's the pilot's fault. These guys suck. They keep crashing the stuff. And it's like, yeah, you do need to step back and assess. But at the same time, is it really like the leader, the general, the people that are in charge there are not the ones assembling the planes or the product?
Yeah. So it's a fascinating thing from a psychology standpoint. If you think about and just think about your own situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So leaders often do this. When somebody else is not performing, they assume it's that individual's inability or their lack of motivation. Like that person is the problem. If I'm not performing, right? If I'm not performing, the first place I go to is its environment, right? So the environment is somehow creating a situation where I can't perform well. Something is getting in the way. Something is causing me problems, right? So I give myself 100% grace on why I'm not performing. Then I might go to, okay, you know what? I'm kind of feeling kind of down and just not really motivated right now. So then I go to motivation. And then finally, at the very end, I might, if I'm still get past that, I might really, if I'm really honest with myself, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And this is why I'm not performing. Right. So I go the opposite way versus with other employees, when I'm evaluating employees, and managers often do this, they start at, this person doesn't know what the hell they're doing. They're not good at their work. And then they eventually might get to, oh, well, actually, maybe they do. And maybe they're really motivated. Oh, and maybe it's actually just the environment itself. So we flip how we treat ourselves versus how we treat our employees. Oftentimes we get it wrong.
So true. Ben, who was joined me on the show last week, says you get a playbook for quote management. It's the HR handbook and policy and process framework, but not for leadership.
That's
and I want to stress again too, for anybody who's watched this show for any length of time or listened to the show for any length of time, management and leadership are not the same thing. So like when Ben's saying you get that playbook for management, HR handbook, policies, processes, framework, it's managing things. Leadership is leading and investing in people. Absolutely. It's the difference there. One of the things you said, and I shifted gears on you, actually, we're about halfway through, so I want to make sure and throw this up again because we just get jamming and I get easily sidetracked. This is how my brain works. A couple of things as you listen to Ian speak, and you're gaining some knowledge and little pieces of his wisdom and insight. A couple of things I would encourage you. One, check out the resources that he offers. And I always try and put them in the show notes, but he always has so much. Like I said, I love the fact that Ian brings receipts. So make sure, check out the show notes if you didn't write the addresses down, like the name of the podcast earlier and so forth. But also connect with Ian. I got 3 different links for him here. YouTube.com/ it's at grow up 512. That's GROUP 512. So it's spelled like group. It always messes with my head when I start searching for you. It's grow up leadership, like on the hat here.
Yes.
Grow up. I can't.
Trying to be clever.
And then also you can connect at grow-leaders-up.com. And lastly, certainly one of the places that I love that Ian shares very no nonsense, funny, really, really funny stuff on your TikTok that is at grow.up.leadership. And it's great. You have some of these shorts and some of the stuff. I remember for me, one of the first ones that I saw, and we'd been connected for a long time, but the one where it's like, where leadership and management talking about incentives, and you're like, oh, hey, they get to have a pizza party. Woo! Right.
I mean, it's a big joke now. It's just a corporate joke at this point.
Yeah.
I will say before we go further, talking about receipts, if you're interested in going deeper in this whole, like I'm talking about, the self-care, that kind of stuff, I'm again borrowing this concept. There's a famous article by Merve Emery. It's MERVE. Last name EMRE. She's a famous author, and she wrote this article in the New Yorker that's called "The Repressive Politics of Emotional Intelligence," and she talks about self-control, turning self-control into a corporate management tool. It's very controversial. A lot of people, because she's really kind of going after emotional intelligence, but the same kind of concept of the corporations essentially using emotional intelligence in a way to control their employees in a sense. So
Wow.
she goes pretty deep, and there's a ton of podcasts and all kinds of other videos and stuff because it was so controversial. So check it out if
Sure.
you get a chance. It's really good.
No, it's really good. I put that in the sidebar, and then I'll make sure and have it in the notes as well.
Awesome.
So one of the things that you said is a downfall. This is something that people got to stop doing. If you moved into leadership and you're listening to a podcast like this, it's because we know you want to grow. And one of the statements, and I shifted gears, and Ian and I will do this from time to time, but you said one of the things that's just a killer and you got to stop with that drives you nuts is overconfidence. So can you expand on that?
Yeah, I think, overconfidence is probably one of the biggest problems in general for, from a psychology standpoint. So there's a famous psychologist named Daniel Kahneman, and he talks, gets really kind of in depth about it and this is where you hear a lot of these different biases that come from, a confirmation bias, hindsight bias. But they all kind of lead to this idea of overconfidence. And what he really is talking about is they call it what you see is all there is, right? So you're only looking at the information of what you see, and then you're
Mm-hmm.
making an opinion based on that. And I think the reality is that there's always more information over on the sides, and you need to gather as much information, especially if you're in a leadership role. You should be actively gathering all the information. I mean, that's why data and metrics and all those things are so helpful for decision making, and also getting different perspectives, right? Asking your employees, what do they think, what do they see? Those kind of actions will give you more information to make more informed decisions. And unfortunately, I think we oftentimes, I think one of the misconceptions in leadership is that leaders somehow need to have all the answers. And that's not realistic. And that's not what your role is. Your role is not to have all the answers. Your role, again, is to ask the good questions to get to the root problems and figure out here, what are our solutions, what are our options, and what's the best way forward for our company and for our staff, for our customers. So, again, it's really, I think, unfortunately, people get overconfident in this idea that they need to have all the answers, and then they start, people are looking to them, so they just start throwing out all the information, and unfortunately, it leads to all kinds of problems.
Let me segue this for you, because I think one of the things too that we end up with when you're talking overconfidence from the leadership's standpoint,
Yeah.
right? If I'm the leader, I'm in charge. It's my ship to steer, so to speak. We get this illusion that that's what we're supposed to be, right? Because doesn't if I'm confident in my role and I'm confident in what I'm at, where I'm at, and I'm leading you, I think we have this illusion that that's something that creates trust. And I I would venture to say it does the opposite, especially when it's proven that we turns out we didn't have all the answers. So one of the things we chatted about just for a couple minutes beforehand, because we were talking about, trust and how do you build better teams. Uh, First off, how important is trust when it comes to leading a team? How can I, as a leader, develop more trust? And then, thirdly, and we'll try and get to all of these, what are some key things that you have seen in your career that just totally blow trust out of the water and totally destroy it?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what is most, if we're talking about what is most important to a leadership role or being a leader, and
Hmm.
there's actually uh, uh, this book here. Shoot, I got it right here in front of me. The authors from Leadership Challenge, so Kuzes and Posner, um, great book, and got great information in here. But they did some studies, right? And large studies over extensive amount of time, that kind of thing. And the thing that came out of it was credibility was the number one kind of requested trait that all staff would like to see from their like, that's the most important thing that you should be demonstrating. And it has to do with trust and integrity and honesty and being candid and all these kind of things. Really what it has to do with is do what you say you're going to do, right? Whatever you say you're going to do it, deliver on it. That's probably if you can take anything away, like, do what you say you're going to do. And there's so many leaders, unfortunately, that don't. And unfortunately, that really erodes trust. I mean, we all know it takes a lot of effort to build trust, and we can lose trust like in the blink of an eye. So, but I think when you talk about trust and you talk about company trust or even individual trust, the problem oftentimes is when we think about trust, we think about trust in every different direction. And really, oftentimes, trust is contextual, right? So it really depends on the context. And I don't think that people really think about that oftentimes. So there's another famous organizational psychologist, or she's a psychologist, named Rachel Botsman.
Okay.
And she specializes, has all kinds of books, podcasts, all kinds of stuff on trust and transparency. And so she does this one thing where she in the group, she basically she's talking about trust, and she asks the group, she says, raise your hand if you trust Amazon. And pretty much everybody in the room, myself
Sure.
included, raise their both hands up. And
Ooh,
because
Amazon.
yeah, and because we have all gotten accustomed to, if I put in my request, I purchase something, it'll be here within the day or whenever they say it is, and they're very transparent, very clear about what's going to happen, how it's going to happen. If I have a problem, I send it back. The great customer service. But then she says, okay, raise your hand if you trust Amazon to take care of their employees. Not as many hands go up, right? People, right? Raise your hand if you trust Amazon is going to do what they need to do to take care of the planet. Who cares about their planet, right? Not many hands, if no hands go up at that point. And it's all about context, right? So the trust that we have is the context is Amazon has done a great job of really presenting themselves as they are customer focused, and this is what they're delivering. They're not necessarily going to always do everything about the employees, and it's all about employees. They're not going to necessarily focus all 100% on the environment and making sure that everything's environmentally friendly, but they are doing what they said they're going to do, and that's why we trust them. So I think
That's
really,
interesting.
yeah. So it's about context, right?
Well, I think that's a phenomenal example. I love that you shared that. You said Rachel Botsman. I put her name in the side there. I think it's so interesting because it's like when you're saying do what they said they were going to do, or do what you say you're going to do.
Be credible.
Amazon never said, "Hey, we're going to do great at taking care of our employees."
No.
And the reality is, as a human, we go like, even when you're saying that, I'm stepping back, going, "Oh, man, that kind of stings. I do want them to take care of their employees,
Sure,
but
but
I also need my groceries tomorrow morning."
right.
And so as long as I think that's a really, I haven't heard that before. And I think it's really interesting that it is context, that it's like, okay, well, they said they were going to do this thing. And because they did this thing and that is what they are and who they represent and how they operate their business, then we trust them for that. But these other pieces. And so I think that's interesting from, have you ever read, to shift gears a little bit, John Maxwell, The 5 Levels of Leadership?
Yes, it's been a while, but yes.
And so that's where my head goes as we're talking about it, is it's like, okay, well, because he talks about these 5 levels of leadership, and you're going to be on different levels depending on the person. So like if as a leader, I've just now hired an employee, they're following you based on title. right?
Right.
Because, hey, you're the manager and I'm going to follow you. And that's like a level one leader. And then as you develop more trust and more relationship, you get up to that point of, a level 4, level 5 leader. And you have to forgive me, I don't remember the steps. I'll have to look it up and include it there as well. But it's like people start out following you based on title because of what you represent, and end up over time, if you have somebody that's there with you a long time, level 4, level 5, they follow you for who you are because of your character, because like what you're saying, you do what you say you'll do. And again, you do what you say you'll do for them. And the reality is people need to realize that even within the company, if I'm functioning right, and I may be a level 4 or level 5 leader with this employee over here that's worked for me for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and I may be a level 2 leader with this other employee that's worked for me for 2 or 3 or 4 years. Because one of the things that comes into trust is the consumer of that trust, the person working for you, the staff member, the follower, is always going to look at, well, what's in it for me? How have you performed for me? Did you deliver on what you said you would for me? Right? That's when you're saying it's contextual. I think it's spot on. It's just I haven't related the two like that before. I think that's really good, Ian.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, and I think that's the problem, is that we throw out, like you said, these buzzwords, trust, transparency, and
Transparency.
we don't really think about what that really means, right? Like, what are we really asking for? So another one, and again, Rachel Boxman, she goes way deeper into all this stuff, and she actually does studies related to these things. But the other concern, when you hear talking about trust, you talking about transparency, right? And the
Yes.
reality is when people are asking for transparency, what they're saying is they don't trust somebody behind the scenes, whatever they're doing. So they want to see all the information, right? They want to know what everything's going on. The reality is that helps them usually none, right? It doesn't build any trust. It's usually it's useless information. That, I mean, you're in management, you know that there are
Yeah.
meetings that you sit in that you are possibly advocating, and there's discussion about decision making going on, but it's so much back and forth and weirdness and things that are irrelevant to a decision, or it wouldn't make sense if it's not in that context, right? You need the full breadth of context from the very beginning of when we started having these meetings to 3 months in when we're making a decision about, if we're changing to a new software system or something like that, right? There's all this discussion going on. And so being transparent about it to your frontline employees, yeah, we can give you we can record the meeting and share it with you, but it's not going to make any sense, and it's probably going to scare the heck out of you, and it's not going to be relevant. And I think there's a lot of stuff that goes on that is not relevant and not helpful. Instead, what you need to do is build trust, and you need to have a conversation. You should be engaging with your frontline staff, and you should, again, this goes back to asking good questions, getting all the information, not demonstrating yourself as this overconfident person, but somebody who asks great questions and gathers all the information to make a good decision. That's how you build that trust. That's how you be credible and then deliver on what you say you're going to do, right? Instead of, we're going to be transparent with you and, share all these meeting notes, or we're going to invite you to all these meetings. It's not going to be relevant, and it's not going to really help the
Right.
situation or that root problem that's there.
Well, I've been in two different situations where transparency becomes a killer on one side or the other too, because the reality, and I've been in business for a long time. I've been in situations where the company said we're going to be completely transparent. We're going to be transparent about our profits, about our losses, and so on and so forth. Most people can handle it when you're winning, right?
Yeah,
They go, "Oh, we're making profits and we're doing good," and so on and so forth. But if you're really direct and you go, "Hey, we're getting our teeth kicked in this quarter, and maybe we're losing money, or we're in this whatever the situation may be,"
right.
some people, it's like that meme, you can't handle the truth,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It freaks them out. I mean, quite literally, in the past, you have to know who it is that you're working with and dealing with, if they can actually handle that level of transparency as well.
right.
Because there are some things that get shared, and people freak out because it's like, oh my gosh, this is my livelihood and I couldn't handle, like, gosh, I wanted you to be honest with me, but I didn't want to know that.
Right.
Right.
Well, and the reality is, again, that's the thing. They don't know if you give them that one slice, okay,
Hmm.
we're gonna, peel back all the curtains and everything, and you get to see everything. Well, you haven't been seeing it for the last 5 years, so you don't know the ups and downs of the
Right.
business and how this is just how it normally I mean, we're happen to be in a low sales month or whatever it may be. This is just not the season for it. And everybody else in the room knows it and is comfortable because they know, next quarter it's going to jump
Swing
back
back
up.
up.
We're going to be good. But when you show them that, and again, it'll be like they're busy doing their work. They should be focused on their work. They don't need to be sitting there combing through all the little things that managers are doing. Instead, you need to build trust. And again, I think there's a difference in you can share information, be honest about where we are. This is what goes into making this decision. This is why we make these decisions. This is how we came to this conclusion, whatever it may be. But you don't need to be transparent and share all the information. I think it's just again, it's become a buzzword and just this constant demand by everybody, and it's not helpful.
Well, and it becomes a lot of times because what happens, human nature says, oh, well, I'm going to look at the thing that's way over here, and then I'm going to look at the end result, and they miss all of the in between, and they jump to, people jump to conclusion. I've been in those situations too,
Yeah.
where somebody will say, oh, well, we want you to be totally transparent, and you look and go, look, okay, we have been, we shared all this stuff, and they go, oh, well, then they feel foolish, and that doesn't create a good situation either,
Right.
right? So I'm curious. One of the things I really wanted to get to, just from your perspective, and we're coming down the tail end here.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we talked about as we were getting ready to go live here was repairing damage done by poor leadership. So have you been in a situation, have you gone in where, trust has been broken or the culture is a disaster and you've had to step in and repair the damage done by that poor leadership and how that culture's been created? And sort of what was that situation at a high level? And then how did you turn it around? And what would you recommend if somebody's, because a lot of people, if they're listening to this show and they go, look, I'm looking for some insight, Mike or Ian, and I'm coming in here and I'm taking on this leadership duty, and all of a sudden, holy crap, I got in here and there's just stuff's broken and I didn't realize it was like this. Where does somebody start? And can you share
Yeah.
that a little bit?
Yeah, and so I mean, I certainly have been in those situations where it's taking on a team that was kind of a mess, or a even a kind of a program or something like that. So a system itself that was broken in some way. Done that in both actually in my work and then certainly in kind of consulting as well. Um, I think one of the first things with any kind of conflict resolution, and any, again, jumping back to psychology, but even in negotiations as well, one of the first things that you should always do, and where I would recommend is starting, is people most often they want to be validated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Validate
Yep.
them. I mean, when you talk about why do people, why do people carry grudges and want revenge and are angry forever or whatever, the Hatfields and McCoys or whatever. They wanted to be validate, each side, like this person, this group needs to be validated. Whatever you're feeling, it's valid. It doesn't mean that I necessarily agree with you. I don't have to agree with what you're saying, but it's valid what you're saying. That's that empathy, that's that understanding their perspective. And that's the only way somebody is going to listen is to start there by validating. You find then common ground, so you can then kind of say, okay, what can we agree on? Like, where do we agree? Right? We agree that we, both all stand behind this mission, or we want this business to be successful, or we want this team to be successful. We can agree on that. We want to deliver whatever this service is. Well, then you just ask questions. Okay, how do we do that? And make sure that that person, that group feels heard. And then you can, again, you're taking that information, especially if you are in a power kind of position where you're in leadership, you get you get to make that ultimate decision, right? You're already going to win. So you don't need to beat people over the head with winning. And I think oftentimes that's the problem, is that people in leadership positions, they automatically are going in and they're just trying to push their power, their power, their power. I'm the authority. I get to make all the decisions. And make sure that group feels heard. Make sure they feel understood. Let them voice whatever ideas they have. They might actually have some really helpful information to share, and then you can use that again to make a decision to move forward.
Love that. So I picked out 3 things because I said, hey, have you had to step in and repair stuff? So anybody that's moving into leadership, you got to fix it. You got to fix a culture. You got to fix a team. And I think, man, what a solid foundation. You said, first off, validate how it is, find that, validate how they're feeling. The only way you can do that is to ask questions. The second thing you said was find some common ground. What's the direction you're all headed? And then the third was ask questions so that everybody can feel heard and participate in that solution.
Yeah.
As we come to the tail end, I'm going to hit you flat-footed on this one because I'm curious what you're going to say. A couple of things. If anybody wants to connect with Ian, and I'm just going to hang on that for a second, so you just sit there and mull about it. If anyone wants to connect with Ian, first off, his TikTok it's fast, it's funny. He shares some great leadership and management memes there. He's at gro.up.leadership on LinkedIn, or on TikTok. He's on you can connect on his website at gro-leaders-up.com, and then certainly YouTube, grow up, GROUP 512. So you can connect with him there. So as we come to the tail end, and certainly I'll ask for any final thoughts, but one thing we talk a lot about is just like this grand scheme and this grand idea of leadership and what leadership is versus management and all these things. And one of the things that we talked about today when we got started was like, okay, what are some bad leadership activities? What are the things people should stop? What should you not be doing? Let's avoid these pitfalls. Let's not do that in leadership.
Sure.
So if you could put a warning label on leadership or bad leadership, what would you say on that warning label?
Yeah, man, it's a long list, but as far as, again, I think probably the number one thing is, and you could flip it the other way, but again, do what you say you're going to do. I would say be credible, because if you lose your credibility, man, all the rest of it is really tough to do, right? Like delivering feedback, trying to coach somebody. If people don't trust you, you've kind of lost your integrity, your credibility. I think the other thing is, so again, do what you say you're going to do, or I don't know how to not say that, but don't do, anyway.
Don't do what you didn't say. No, be credible. I like the warning label. Just be credible.
Do what you say you're going to do. And then I think that the other one is I would say stop looking for mistakes. Like stop spending your time looking for mistakes, and instead spend your time looking for potential. Will be the other one. Yeah. So that would probably those would be the 2 things that I would say. If you can do that as a leader, as a manager, whatever role you're in and whatever kind of leadership you're demonstrating, man, you will be probably ahead of 95% all staff, all leaders out there.
I love that, man. Thank you, Ian. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Leadership Toolkit. You're awesome. I really always appreciate your insight and your wisdom, the things that you share. If you'd hang out for just a second, I'm going to go ahead and take us out.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Yeah, bye, absolutely.
Y'all. Thank y'all.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to bring us to a close for another episode of the Leadership Toolkit with my friend Ian MacLeod. He is just awesome. That's why, like I said, he's a friend of the show, and I learn something from everybody that comes on the show. And Ian is somebody that definitely I look to as a teacher and a mentor. He's somebody that's just, if you're not connected with him, connect with him. Look him up. Certainly he's on Facebook and LinkedIn and all these other places, but check out his website, check out his YouTube, check out his TikTok. I love his closing statements that he said, stop looking for mistakes and instead look for potential. That is such a powerful statement when it comes to leadership. So, by all means, everybody connect with him. Do me a favor. For everybody that watches the show, one of the ways that this show grows, please make sure you subscribe to the show, throw some thumbs up on it. Most importantly, if you know somebody that you could help grow by watching this episode, if it's you watching it again down the road, so you can remember, hey, I need to avoid these leadership mistakes. If you can subtly slide it into somebody's inbox that maybe needs to avoid these leadership mistakes right now, just share it with them. Like, that's one of the biggest ways this podcast grows. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. If you're enjoying it, make sure and leave us a rating. And more than anything, share the show and make an impact on somebody else's life. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate everybody for taking the time to tune in and join me. Until we speak next, stay great, everybody. We'll talk soon.